Can you get your Bibles or your scripture journal? Go to Genesis chapter 22 or your phone. I told you we got to cover 3 chapters today, but I want to begin at the last chapter, chapter 22. And in chapter 22, at this point, Abraham, this guy we've been studying, he and his wife Sarah will have given birth to Isaac. And then in chapter 22, one of the most famous chapters in the entire Bible, God is going to ask Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And it is set up as God testing Abraham. I was thinking about tests, and I stumbled across a story about a college student, sophomore in college. This comes from Duke University, the other side of the country. He's a sophomore at Duke University, and he enrolls in a class that is notoriously difficult, really hard final exam every year. The final in this class is incredibly difficult. The class is ornithology. Anyone know what ornithology is? Study of birds, okay? So it's a really hard class. He knows it's going to be hard, and so all semester long, he studies as hard as he can. He reads, he's taking notes, note cards, all of it, so that when it finally comes down to the final, he is going to ace this thing. And the day of the final finally comes, the end of the term, and he walks into class, but it's not what he was expecting. It's not a multiple choice kind of test. It's not like short answer or essay question, nothing like that. When he walks in, what he sees on the screen is 25 pictures. And it's 25 pictures actually not of like the whole bird. It's not a picture like their feathers. He knew the color of the birds. He knew that kind of stuff, their beaks, all that kind of thing. It was 25 pictures of birds' feet. Just 25 feet. And the professor said, here's the deal. 1 through 25, you identify these 25 birds just by their feet. Well, this student, sophomore, he stands up in the middle of this class and he's like, that's insane! Who in the world will know 25 birds just by their feet? And the professor's like, sorry, young man, this is the test. You need to sit down and take the test. Identify these 25 birds. This is the final. And he's like, I won't do it. I can't do it. I'm walking out. And he says, well, okay, you can walk out, but if you walk out, know this, you will fail the final. So he says, all right, go ahead, fail me. I'm walking out. So he gets up and he makes his way to the door. And the professor says, all right, you failed. Now tell me your name, young man. And the boy, he pulls up his pants and kicks off his shoes and he says, you tell me, professor, you tell me what my name is. And storms out. I was thinking about that story and the test that we're going to see today in Genesis chapter 22. We're not going to see a test like you would think in a classroom. Certainly there's a sense of passing and failing this test. But actually, the test that we're going to see today in Genesis chapter 22 is more of a test that causes us to learn. That Abraham learns as a result of this test. Isaac, we'll see, learns as a result of this test. You and I, we learn and we grow as a result of this test that we're going to see take place in Genesis 22. So go to chapter 22. Let me read to you just verse 1 here, just the opening verses. After these things, here it is, God tested Abraham. After these things, God tested Abraham. Throughout Abraham's life, we know this. We've been studying this now for many weeks. We have seen God test the faith of Abraham. Like, Abraham, do you really believe me? Abraham, do you really trust me? Abraham, are you really willing to follow me? We said this in week 1, back when we studied chapter 12, faith trusts the promise, not the circumstance. And this is what God has been testing Abraham with over and over again. Will you really trust me, the promise, or will you trust the circumstances that you see in life? Think about this. Why did God not immediately, as soon as Abraham said, all right, God, I'll trust you, why didn't he immediately give him the son? Why does it take 25 years? Why didn't he immediately just take him and move him to the promised land? Abraham, go here, settle down here, be here, this is where you're going to be. Why doesn't God just do it immediately? As soon as Abraham responded with his first act of faith, why doesn't he do it? This is really important. It's a simple truth. Because God was not just taking Abraham somewhere, he was making Abraham into someone. This is just a really, I think, powerful truth that we see play out in the life of Abraham and actually plays out in your life too. That God is not just trying to take you somewhere. It's not just the do's and don'ts of Christianity, but God is trying to form something in you. As we live a life of faith, as we walk by faith, God begins to form us into something. And so God continually puts Abraham in places where his faith can be lived out. And as a result, his faith grows or it fails. So today, Abraham is going to face his biggest test. I already told you, this test will be one of Abraham sacrificing his son. We'll look at it in a moment, but can you just fast forward to the very end with me? Verse 15, let's see how the story ends. So after the test has taken place, it says this: "And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, 'By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you. And I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore.'" This has always been the promise. "And your offspring shall possess the gates of his enemies." This is a new promise, actually. Now verse 18, "And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have," now underline this, "obeyed my voice." Because you have obeyed my voice. I want you to see this today. There is a connection between faith and obedience. Here's a really simple point for you to write down. Faith acts in obedience to what God says. Faith acts in obedience. Faith is put on display. Faith is seen in our obedience to the Word of God, to what God has said. When you really trust God, when you really live by faith, when you really take Him by His Word, something will happen in our life. There'll be action behind it. One of my favorite authors, A.W. Tozer, said it this way: "The Bible recognizes no faith that does not lead to obedience, nor does it recognize any obedience that does not spring forth from faith. The two are opposite sides of the same coin." Faith and obedience. Now, in our very autonomous society, we don't like that word obey, right? Obedience. There's just something about it that kind of rubs us the wrong way. I was at Little League games this week. Actually, Friday night, I was at Little League Home Run Derby. Super awesome event, Home Run Derby for Little League. And I was talking to this other dad, Christian guy, goes to a different church in town. I was talking to him. He asked me, "Hey, what are you preaching on this Sunday, Bryan, at church?" And I said, "We're going to talk about how faith and obedience go hand in hand." And he's like, "Oh, that's true." He's a good guy. He's a Christian guy. He says, "Yeah, that's true." People don't want to hear that, though, right? And he said this: "I think we would rather have a faith in God that saves, but not one that requires submitting and obedience to Him. We want the Savior part, but not the Lord parts." Like, isn't that true? And just in our culture today, obedience isn't really like a word that's like one we like. American culture prizes everything that is rebellious and edgy, like forge your own path, you do you kind of idea. So let's unpack this story together because it has a lot to teach us about how faith and obedience go hand in hand. Okay, now let's go backwards, okay? Let's do this whole thing. Go back to chapter 20. Here's what I want to do. I want to go through chapter 20 and 21, and I want to go I want to fast forward through it really quickly. You know how when you listen to a podcast, you can do like 1.5 or 2.0 like speed, or if you're really crazy, like 3.5 or something like that? That's what we're going to do right here, okay? So give me 5 minutes, 2 chapters, and then we'll get back into chapter 22. Chapter 19 ends with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. You might remember that Lot, Abraham's nephew, has been rescued out of that. He's with his daughters. They're living in a cave, and his daughters begin to scheme. It turns out you can take your kids out of Sodom, but you can't get Sodom out of your kids. And what happens is these 2 daughters, they get their dad drunk on 2 consecutive nights. They both go in and sleep with him. They get pregnant and have kids. And then Lot and these daughters exit stage left out of the story of Genesis. Now, we'll see the the descendants show up in the story of Israel. And now we're left back in the story of Abraham. Look at chapter 20, verse 1. It says this, "And from there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar." Okay, stop for a second. Abraham, still, he continues to be very migrant, moving around. He hasn't settled down yet in a place. God, settled down here, and so he's moving around. He ends up in a place called Gerar. It turns out there's a king of this area. Verse 2 says this, "And Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, 'She is my sister.'" That sound familiar? Ring any bells if you've been around church here for a little while? Because actually, back in chapter 12, this exact same thing happens. And when we read it, you read it, you ought to be like, "What? Abraham, don't you ever learn?" Now, we don't get the details like we did back in chapter 12. I would imagine it's very similar. In chapter 12, there's a famine, and Abraham and Sarah, they make their way towards Egypt, and Abraham looks at his wife and says, "You're very attractive. They're going to want you, and in order to get you, they're going to kill me, your husband, so let's just tell them we're brother and sister, and then they can have you," and Pharaoh ends up with her. It's all a mess. And so we would imagine that the kind of exact same scenario takes place. We're just told that he shows up and says to the king, "She's my sister." Kind of self-preservation thing. I mean, he knows the promise. Just a chapter earlier, chapter 19, God has reiterated that promise again, and he's actually said, "Within a year, Abraham, within a year, Sarah, you're going to have this baby that's been promised." What are you doing? Rip our hair out. He tells the same lie again. When will he learn? Let's not be too hard on Abraham, though, okay? Because you've done this too, right? You fell into that sin, and you're like, "Okay, God, forgive me. I'm out. I'm going a new direction," only to fall into the same thing again. This is Abraham. Just back to the same spot again. He lies again. Okay, so that's chapter 20. Thankfully, God steps in, protects Sarah, speaks to the king in a dream. Obviously, the king gets upset, but lets Abraham and Sarah go. Now, chapter 21 says this. Let me just read to you these 7 verses, okay? Because this is actually kind of like the climax of everything we've been building towards in the story. "The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was look at this, 100 years old when his son Isaac was born." Just stop. Sarah is 10 years younger. She's 90 years old. Abraham was 75 years old back in chapter 12 when the promise came. 25 years of waiting. And finally, this child is born. I'll tell you what. Moses, he's the one writing this. I would have given it more than just a couple verses. This is a pretty big moment. It's like he just kind of and then it happens. Right? There should be more here. But this is the story, born, verse 6, "And Sarah said, 'God has made laughter for me, and everyone who hears will laugh with me.'" There's an excitement here. Verse 7, "And she said, 'Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.'" Sarah's like, "I wouldn't believe this if I hadn't lived it. Who would believe that Abraham, Sarah, that we could have kids?" But that's exactly what has happened, and it comes with very little fanfare. Moses just says the baby is born. Now, like I said, we're speeding through chapter 21 and 22. If we were to slow down, though, and press pause for one moment, here's 3 things we could learn. We won't expound on these. Let me just give you the points. Here's what we learn. Number 1, God keeps his promises. He does. When we read the text, we ought to just say, God is a promise-keeping God. Number 2, God's timing is perfect. 25 years. God's timing is perfect. Number 3, nothing is impossible for God. Nothing. He's 100 years old. She's 90. And a child is born. So if we were preaching the sermon, we would say, well, God keeps his promises. God's timing is perfect. Nothing is impossible for God. Abraham was a man who struggled in his faith. We've seen that. Up and down, up and down. Maybe that's you too. Up and down. We felt it. Know this. Our God is a promise-keeping God whose timing is always perfect. Nothing is impossible for him. You can take that to the bank. In the highs and lows of your faith journey, you can hold on to that. What happens next? Well, in chapter 21, what we see is that Isaac, when he's probably 4 or 5 or so, when he's weaned, there's a party that is thrown. And at this party, actually, Sarah comes to Abraham and says, hey, Abraham, we have a little bit of a problem I want us to deal with. Remember Hagar and Ishmael, your son, and the servant lady? We need to get rid of them. We need to kick them out of the camp. And Sarah's actually worried that somehow Ishmael will get some of the inheritance that's going to go to Isaac, that maybe he'll get some of the blessing, some of the promise will go to him. And Ishmael ain't Sarah's son. She wants it all to go to Isaac. And you and I hear that, and I think we feel the exact same way that Abraham does, because the text actually tells us that when Abraham hears this, Abraham becomes distressed. That's distressing, isn't it? Like it's not Ishmael's fault. It's not Hagar's fault. And so Sarah's like, hey, just kick them out. That's kind of distressing, isn't it? We'd say, no, you can't do that. That's not a good way to treat people. But then something shocking happens. God speaks to Abraham. And God actually says to Abraham, listen to your wife. Do what she just said. Kick them out. What? But then our promise-making God makes a promise. Says, you don't need to worry. Don't worry about her. Don't worry about your son. I'm going to make him into a great nation. It's not the promise of Isaac. It's not coming through that line, but he will be made into a great nation. And so Abraham responds and sends him out. And we don't exactly know where they were headed, Hagar and Ishmael. I would assume they're on their way back to Egypt. That's where she's from. They end up out in the desert, lost and alone. They're very tired and they become very thirsty. They run out of water. Let's pick up the story, verse 15, chapter 21. When the water in the skin was gone, when the water had run out of the water bottle, she put the child under one of the bushes. He's a teenage child. This isn't a baby. You might read that as a baby. No, he's not a baby. This is a teenager who is incredibly thirsty, about to die. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Verse 18, up, lift up the boy, hold him fast with your hands, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Just notice this. God took care of Ishmael. God took care of Hagar. And now Ishmael and Hagar exit stage left out of the story of Genesis. Now their descendants will show up in the story of Israel throughout time. And now we come full circle back to Genesis chapter 22. So now let's slow down and let's see this. Remember the point. This is the point for the whole day. Faith acts in obedience to what God says. This is what we're going to learn. Abraham right here, chapter 22, is going to be an example of faithful obedience. Verse 1, let's go back to it. After these things, God tested Abraham. So after everything we just read, God is going to test Abraham now. And he said to him, Abraham. And Abraham responded, here am I. Let's underline that. Here am I. This isn't a Hebrew language way of just saying hello. Hey, here am I. It's actually a phrase that means something along the lines of, I stand ready for your commands. It's a phrase of surrender. If you study the Bible, you might know Isaiah chapter 6, when Isaiah is talking with God, Isaiah says this, here am I, send me, in the presence of God. Here I'm fully surrendered. Tell me what to do. Send me out as your prophet, as your missionary, would you send me? And so here God shows up and God says, Abraham, and immediately steps up and he says, here am I, fully surrendered. What do you want? Which I find shocking, quite honestly, because so far in Abraham's life, think about it. Every time God has shown up, he asks Abraham to give up something. to leave something, to like go through something that will be difficult. I don't know about you, but if I've been doing that, 100 years old, now, he's actually even older than that now. Son's finally born. Like, I'm kind of like, okay, God, I don't hear you anymore. I'm not fully surrendered ready. I've lived my life. I'm ready to kind of shut her down right now. But here he is. Here am I. And so the reader, us, as we read what Moses is writing here, you ought to anticipate something. What is God going to ask this time? He's fully surrendered. He's ready. What's he going to ask? We find out in verse 2. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. This, no small thing, that God is asking Abraham to do. Now, let's try to understand this test, okay? Because that's how it's framed. I want you to notice the emotional build. He starts saying, take your son. But not just your son, take your only son. Isaac, the one that you waited 25 years for, the one who most scholars say he's a teenager now. That son, take your son, your only son, whom you love. This one that means everything to you. And go offer him there as a burnt offering. A complete and total sacrifice. Would you give him up? God is testing whether Abraham loves the gift or the giver. Does he love the promise or the promise maker? It's certainly a question of faith and obedience. Here's what we're going to learn, though. God does his best work at the corner of faith and obedience. This is what takes place in the story. But there's something, I don't know, absurd about this command. There's something about this that just makes us uncomfortable, doesn't it? Really? Like, God, why would you ever ask Abraham to do this? How in the world can this request to kill Isaac like make moral or theological sense? Richard Dawkins, who outspoken atheist, he wrote that book, God Delusion. He, in that book, cites Genesis chapter 22 as one of the reasons why you should not believe in God. He calls this God like a grotesque God, a God that would ask you to sacrifice. There's no God that would do that. Well, two things. One, if God is God, he can do whatever he wants. But also, the story doesn't end with verse 2. God sees a much bigger picture here, okay? So just hang with me here, because I know it's uncomfortable, but let's just be uncomfortable for a second, and let's be very clear about what God is asking Abraham to do. God is asking Abraham to travel with his son to Moriah, the mountain. That's actually where Jerusalem is today, to build an altar of stones on one of the mountains. He is then to take wood and make a platform. Then Abraham will put Isaac down on the wood. He will take out a knife and slit Isaac's throat the same way a sacrificial lamb would be slain. And finally, he would light the wood on fire, burning his son's body as an offering to God. This is what we see right here in verse 3. At this point, Abraham only has one of two options. Either he will obey or he won't obey. Let's see what happens. Verse 2 is the command. Verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood from the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. Stop right there. I want you to notice, here's what we're going to do as we kind of work through 22 here, chapter 22. I want you to notice 3 things about Abraham's obedience, okay? 3 things. Number 1, Abraham obeyed immediately. The next morning, he gets up and he takes off. No delay, no negotiation, no, I'll get around to it someday. Abraham obeyed immediately. You don't have to understand completely to obey immediately. Or you could say it this way, faith moves before it has all the answers. This is what faith looks like in obedience. It moves without knowing the complete story, of understanding completely how this is going to work out. Now, I don't want to camp out here too long, but it's at least worth considering this. What has God declared in his word that you've been delaying in obedience towards? What has God declared in his word that you've been slow in responding to? I know, we want all the details. We want to know how it's going to play out. But faith moves when God speaks. And Abraham, he didn't understand everything, but he trusted in what God said. So where do you need to obey? Just for example, the Bible, I think, is very clear on this, that we are to be people who forgive one another. Do you forgive immediately? We make excuses, but if I forgive them, they'll never learn. They'll do it again. If I forgive them, then they won't know how much they've really hurt me. If I forgive them, then it's like they just got away with it. But faith moves before it has all the answers. Abraham obeyed immediately. Or think about generosity. The Bible says to be generous with your time, with your talents, with your money. But I can't right now. Gas prices are too high. Faith moves before it has all the answers. Or how about the Bible's pretty clear on sharing the gospel. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are to be a fisher of men. You're to share your faith, tell people about Jesus. Oh, but I'm not trained for that. What if they ask questions I don't have answers to? What if they don't like me? What if I lose a friend? Faith moves before it has all the answers. Or maybe call to serve in the church. Or start a ministry. I can't do that. I don't have the skills for that. I don't know how to do that. Faith moves before it has all the answers. So, what has God declared in his word that you've been delaying in? Abraham obeyed immediately. Verse 4. On the third day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. So apparently, it was a journey to get to Mount Moriah. 3-day journey. He finally gets there and he looks off and they can see where they want to go. Let me make a second point here about Abraham's obedience. First, Abraham obeyed immediately. Secondly, Abraham obeyed continually. He continued to obey. 3 days, he just keeps going. Say it this way, faith isn't proven in a moment, but over the miles. You can put a lot of miles into your faith journey, all of us, followers of Jesus, a lot of miles in your faith journey. Will you continue to be faithful? Continue to walk in obedience. Continue to obey. I bet you know what it's like to set out in faith, but to falter. Be on fire for Jesus, walking in obedience, but then to kind of relapse into old ways. Sometimes, yes, the start is the hard part. Sometimes, though, it's harder with time, not easier, actually, to continue to be faithful in obedience. Faith acts in obedience not just once, but continually. Look at verse 5. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there," and underline this word, worship. Isn't that an interesting word choice? When you've been called to go sacrifice your son, we're going to go worship. Seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? A weird word to say, but we are learning something here. Your sacrificial obedience is worship to God. It is. Worship is not simply the fact we gather together as a church and we sing songs or that we study the Word of God. Your obedience to God is worship. And that's what Abraham is saying. We're going to go and we're going to worship. But actually what I want to call your attention more to is the last phrase. So me and the boy, we're going to go over there, we're going to worship and come again to you. Me and the boy, we're going to come back down. Now, we're reading the story. Where did God say the son was coming back? Because actually what I saw was, go kill your son, burn the body. We're going to come back? What's going on here? This is actually where the Bible is very helpful in interpreting itself. The Bible interprets the Bible. The author of Hebrews tells us what was going through the minds of Abraham. Chapter 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. Now look at verse 19. He considered, this is what Abraham was thinking, that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. He was as good as dead there, being sacrificed. He rose back. But God, even if he had died, here's what Abraham was thinking. God could raise him back up. Is that not incredible faith right there? A faith that results in obedience? I know the promise. I know the promise. There's God. As much of the stars will come from this line. So God's asking me to do something don't make no sense in that line. But I believe this, I guess. that he'll raise him from the dead if this is what he's asking me to do. It's faith right there. It's trusting in the promise, not the circumstance. And actually, we get more information in this conversation that takes place between father and son. Look at verse 6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he said, here am I, my son. He said, behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Okay, so Isaac's like, okay, I got the wood, it's loaded up on my back, and I see you got the torch of the fire, and you got the knife, but, like, where's the lamb? You said we're going to go worship. Like, where's the sacrifice? Where's the lamb at? Isaac's in, like, he's like, okay, something's going on here. This doesn't quite line up. Look at verse 8. And Abraham said, underline this. God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them, together. This is so important. Abraham's obedience to God is not fueled by self-confidence, but a confidence in the character of God. God will provide. He wasn't saying, here's what Abraham was not saying, I will handle this. He's saying, I believe God will handle this. I don't understand it, but we're going to take a step of faith and we're going to move forward in obedience. Your obedience to God is not accomplished by trying harder. It's not. It's actually by trusting in a God who provides. Trust and obey, two sides of the same coin. Verse 9. When they came to the place of which God had told them, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood, just like God said to do. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took his knife to slaughter his son. Okay, this is the third thing we learn about the obedience of Abraham. Not only was it immediate, not only was it continual, third thing, Abraham obeyed completely. Completely. Okay, God, you've asked it. We're not stopping short here. We're continually all the way up to completion. In other words, you could say it this way, faith surrenders the part of you you want to keep. This is what faithful obedience looks like. God, you can have every part of it completely, all of me. I just said it. Abraham believes God's going to provide. Hebrews tells us he believes even his son would rise again. Abraham doesn't have a roadmap of what's going to happen. He's guessing God's going to do something. He doesn't know, but he steps into it. It's funny. The second sermon I ever preached, this was 22, 23 years ago, okay? I'm 18 years old. Second sermon I ever preached in my life. The title of the sermon was this: When Faith and Obedience Collide, it produces action. That's a long sermon title, by the way. When faith and obedience collide, it produces action. I was reading through it because I save all my sermons like on my computer. So I was reading through it. It's like the worst sermon ever. Makes no sense. Absolutely no clear thought line through the entire thing. But I knew this title of the sermon. It's like I should read that sermon before I preach this. Maybe there's some good stuff in there I could share with the church. There were two good lines, okay? Only two good lines in the entire sermon. Number one, people like to be called Christians as long as it doesn't inconvenience them. Isn't that true? People like to be called Christians as long as it doesn't inconvenience them. Man, I'll tell you what, immediately, continually, and completely can be a big inconvenience. It can be. The second line from that sermon, Christians today are educated far beyond their obedience. Isn't that true? We can know a lot of things, but where the rubber meets the road is where faith and obedience collide in action. By the way, kudos here to Isaac. He's a teenager. He's strong enough to carry the wood up the mountain. He's definitely strong enough to evade his 110, 115-year-old dad. But he willingly lays down on the altar, tied up. Like he's crawling up on the altar, trusting God and his dad. Would any of your teenagers do that? I mean, no? The only way Isaac would do this is because he had inherited a faith of his father he had. He trusted dad, yes, and he trusted his dad's God. Something had been passed down in this time. You know, we say all the time that there's generational sin that can be passed down, but there's a generational faith that can be passed down. And this is what has happened in this situation. Abraham obeyed completely. The question I think we could ask ourselves is this: what is hardest for you to trust God with right now in your life? Completely. Future, kids, marriage, money, reputation, calling, comfort, control. What would it be, man, to completely obey God in this area? Let's look what happens. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him. Remember, the knife is up in the air. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. Give me a new command. Verse 12, he said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his thorns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. You see what happens? God intervenes. Abraham obeys. The test is over. We're told that God now knows that Abraham trusts God. Now, God always knew that. There's something more going on here. Abraham is experiencing the blessings of obedience. Isaac is certainly learning what it looks like to have a faith that obeys. Could you imagine the stories that Isaac could tell now? Like, he was right there. You guys won't believe this. I was on there. My dad was up there. And God stepped in and he saved the day. Just like he said, just trust in God. It's going to be okay. There's a lot of teaching going on in the midst of this test. Because remember, God isn't just taking Abraham somewhere. He's forming something in him, a faith that obeys. There was a lady in our church. She passed away a couple years ago. If you've been around Redemption for a while, you would know her. Her name was Vera Lyons. Incredible lady. I miss her. She was an incredible servant of God. Vera, when she was in her 30s, been married just 14 years, her husband passed away, leaving her a single mom with 2 kids that she would raise. Her husband went in for surgery and didn't come out. Passed away, and so she was left raising this kid. She would never remarry. She was a teacher for 37 years down in California. She'd retire, moved to Corvallis. That's when we met her. And until the very end of her time in Corvallis, she would teach Sunday school to kids on Sundays and Tuesday nights. Both of my daughters, just still speak of, this is what Vera taught me, as she faithfully taught every single week. You know, at the intersection of faith and obedience, you know who I see? Vera. At the intersection of faith and obedience, I see Vera. So one time, she's hanging around church, and it was during the week, and I was talking to her about her life and her husband passing away and just kind of like learning. And she says to me, Pastor, my husband died when I was very young, and I still don't understand why. I don't see the reason why that would be. I wish he never did. He said, and she said, I never really even considered remarrying. It was never even on my radar. I raised my kids. I taught and served in the church. I've lived a good, blessed, full life. So then I said to her, Vera, tell me, what's your secret? How's that possible, in the midst of everything going on? And she said this. I wrote it down. All we can do is trust and obey. You know that hymn, Trust and Obey, the old hymn? We sang that at her funeral up here. Trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there is no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Verse 3 of that hymn, but we never can prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay. We never experience the true blessing and love of God until we're willing to give it all up on the altar. What is the secret to faithful obedience, this trust and obey? Let me rephrase it for you. What's the secret? You can obey God because you can trust God. This is what's being taught in the text. You can obey God today, immediately and continually and completely. Why? Because our God has time and time again proven himself to be a trustworthy God. Keep reading, verse 14. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. What you name a place is significant. In the Hebrew language, Hebrew text, significance, because it summarizes the significance of an event. And I find it interesting that the name of this place is not Abraham obeyed. It's the Lord provides. You see, something more important than Abraham's impressive obedience is put on display here. The character of our God is the one you can trust. He is the one who provides. He provides at the right moment. He provides when Abraham could not. Human effort got him up the mountain, but only God could provide the substitutes. Obedience isn't about trying harder. It's realizing God's way is better. You can trust him. Okay, I think I would be remiss if I didn't at least end and give you one more point to kind of give us a full picture of what's happening here in Genesis. The story of Isaac prepares us for the story of Jesus. The story of Isaac, write that down, prepares us for the story of Jesus. God is providing a substitutionary sacrifice right here in the text, and it is a clear foreshadowing of Jesus and what he would come to do. But think about it. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18, for Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous. A substitution takes place. 2 Corinthians 5:21, God made him who had no sin to be sin, to take our place on the cross. This is the gospel, that Jesus would take your place, die in your place on the cross. Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. The way we might say it in theological circles is Jesus is the greater Isaac. Think about Jesus and Isaac here. They are both beloved sons. Both of them, Mount Moriah, this is Jerusalem. Both of them carrying wood up the mountain. A 3-day journey, 3 days in the grave. But Isaac, he is saved. Jesus is sacrificed. Jesus is the greater Isaac. You and I actually, in this case, end up being like Isaac. We're the ones who are set free. The story of Isaac prepares us for the story of Jesus. Okay, let me ask you 3 questions, and then we'll be done. What obedience are you delaying? Remember, it's immediate. What are you tempted to quit obeying? Remember, it's continual. And what have you not fully surrendered to God? Remember, faith and obedience is complete. They call it the other drug problem. In reference to prescription drugs. Did you know this? That on average, half of patients with chronic illnesses like heart disease, asthma, skip doses or mess up the amount they're supposed to take, including doctors. Doctors prescribe medicine, even for themselves to be able to be able to survive. End up taking the wrong doses, don't take it at the right time, and suffer. I think this was actually made really popular. I don't know when it was. 10, 15 years ago, when former President Bill Clinton, who was taking a high cholesterol medication, he stopped taking it, thought he was fine, ended up having to have open heart surgery to fix things, and he would later have a campaign about, hey, you should do what the doctors say here. It's good for you. I think about that illustration because how easy it is for us. Man, we've been prescribed, this is what it looks like to live, and you can trust the one who's prescribed it. So go and live, trust, and obey. I'm going to pray for you, and as I pray, I just want you to consider your own hearts. Is there something you've been delaying? Is there something you're thinking of quitting? Have you really fully surrendered to God? I wonder how the Spirit might move in your own life to say, hey, let's trust and obey in this area.